The problem, as I see it, is that in most of the popular press, the popular magazines, and that, there's a standard narrative about what stress is, and that narrative holds that stress is an individual problem, individual solutions. So if you're
Mm.
feeling stressed, here's the recipe, and if you follow this recipe, you can make stress go away. So there's a couple of problems with that. Is that number one, stress is actually a social problem. It's a cultural problem. It's something that flows through population because we are a hyper social animal. And if there is emotion that is surging through the population, you're going to feel it because you're connected to everybody else. So stress is contagious and it's a shared predicament.
Welcome to the Quest for Questions podcast. Today's guest is a walking reminder of our human origins, or said differently, of how we as humans used to live and think for 99% of time on the planet Earth. The main challenge that he's been tackling for over 30 years now is how do we retain some of our ancestry and our ancestral ways while making it work in the modern world and environment. And as Frank beautifully put it, the challenge isn't small because we are just animals who are trying to function in an alien environment. We're all trying to adapt to this world that we don't really understand. The three main questions me and Frank are exploring today. What caused the big shift from humans living in harmony with nature to the present moment where it's man against nature trying to master it? Why a trip to ground zero of human experience, which is Africa, changed Frank's perspective on human condition forever? And finally, what is the unifying story that will bring us humans together moving forward? So without any further ado, this is Konrad, Yerba, Addict, and here's my conversation with the one and only Frank Forencich. Enjoy.
Let's go live. I'll start as always with a quote, and this one is from no other than Albert Einstein. It's, I think the most important question facing humanity is the universe a friendly place? This is the first and most basic question all people must answer for themselves. For if we decide that the universe is an unfriendly place, then we will use our technology, our scientific discoveries, and our natural resources to achieve safety and power by creating bigger walls to keep out from unfriendliness and bigger weapons to destroy all that which is unfriendly. And I believe that we are getting to a place where technology is powerful enough that we may either completely isolate or destroy ourselves as well in the process. If we decide that the universe is neither friendly nor unfriendly, then the God is essentially playing with dice with the universe. Then we are simply victims to the random toss of the dice, and our lives have no real purpose or meaning. But if we decide that the universe is a friendly place, then we'll use our technology, our scientific discoveries, and our natural resources to create tools and models for understanding that universe, because power and safety will come from understanding its workings and its motives. God does not play dice with the universe. Albert Einstein. So I think how I was connected with you and your work and your books and all your ideas is that I would like you to take us down the evolution and the history line a bit, and tell us, why should we even care about our environment and habitat and the universe around us? I mean, aren't we all just like, lone individuals, and that's all there is, our personality, our will, and this the body that is here that is just like a mix of separate organisms.
Right. Yeah, well, I'd like to circle back to that because I love that initial quote from Einstein, and I find it so interesting because when I look at the nervous system of the human animal, the autonomic nervous system in particular, that's what we are asking about our habitat all day, every day throughout the course of our lives. We're asking, is my habitat friendly? Is it not friendly? And that is such a pivotal question, especially for the young human animal. So when you're first born, into a natural habitat the way we would be in, say, a paleo kind of setting, that's the first question we ask. Is our habitat friendly? And if the answer is yes, the body turns on all sorts of growth factors that make the body stronger and more resilient throughout life. But if the answer is no, we turn on a stress response and turn on vigilance and hypervigilance, even, and start looking at the world in a completely different way. So that's like the fork in the road for the young developing organism. And what's really interesting to me now is that I think a lot of people and a lot of cultures around the world are starting to just treat the world as an unfriendly place. And that's kind of a background assumption that a lot of people hold now, and it's a really dangerous place to go. One example of that is some researchers compiled all the stories about alien life forms coming to Earth. So they looked at all the science fiction stories, and they asked, okay, who are these aliens coming in? Are they hostile or are they friendly? And in the vast majority of these science fiction stories, the aliens are described as being unfriendly. And
Yeah. Yeah.
isn't that interesting? I mean, they could be described as being friendly. They could be described as being colleagues, associates, our friends. But no, we choose to describe them as being unfriendly invaders. And that holds true in most of these science fiction stories. So there's something slightly paranoid about the modern human being. And that's another conversation we can have. So
Yeah, and I think the interesting, just so you can maybe also, as I said, about the kind of the history lane is that it wasn't always the case, right? I even watched
yeah.
like just a couple of days ago this incredible movie. You probably know it from Werner Herzog, Cave of Forgotten Dreams, about
Mm.
this cave in France, from with those like amazing paintings from 34,000 years ago. And the interesting thing is they never talked about in the movie. They didn't raise that question, but the big question that I had in my head was that all those paintings were paintings of animals. There were no paintings of humans. I was like, why is that? Isn't that maybe we were just like we were so intermingled with nature that we didn't really like even think of ourselves as that important. And that's
Mhm.
why even if we made the paintings, there was a human. It was just like human lion, human minotaur, or something, right? So what do you think? Like, where was this? Like, how was it in history, and how did it change? You know, as far as this kind of unfriendly approach to nature, and before supposedly we're living with like harmony with it, right?
Yeah, that's a really common theme in native and indigenous cultures. This idea of modesty and humility is built into their culture. And our modern culture is the outlier there, where we think, we are very interested in our own posture and our own profile in the world. And we think that we're really great. So there's a historian that has made a great distinction here. His name is Morris Berman, and he wrote a book called The Reenchantment of the World. And the way he broke down history was he said we had this long, long period of participatory consciousness where we saw ourselves as participants in this grand drama of life. And then sometime in the last couple thousand years, or certainly the last 100 years, there's been this dramatic shift to non-participatory consciousness, which is basically scientific or alienated consciousness. And that's the fundamental shift. That's the breaking of the world. And we we aren't talking about that very much. We think of ourselves as being separate from nature, but that's a totally new, unproven idea. So
Mm.
we're really living in a very strange time right now. Most of our history was of participatory consciousness being woven into nature. And that idea, that's a human universal. That is something that native people have always believed. So we're different.
Yeah. And what's do you think, based on what you kind of learned, um, I think maybe the good place to start is, what do you think was that big shift? Like what has happened in our culture? I have some ideas. For example, like science being one of the, like, we made science our gods in a way that, everything that has a number and can be measured is now their religion. And, we try to like measure, quantify and control everything. But, I'm curious how how do you think from your perspectives and your reading and your learning and talking about it, like, what do you think was this big shift? And also like your story of how you actually got into this whole, like, okay, now we are at this stage and we are kind of like not doing what we're supposed to. And this is what we used to do in the past. I know you also, one of the big realization was I was spending time in Africa with with like native tribesmen. So let's dig into that. Like, what was your kind of, what do you think happened? And what's your kind of like, where was your realization about that, about this whole like human nature connection and disconnection?
Right. Well, one guy you want to read is Ian McGilchrist, who's written a book called The Master and His Emissary. And it's a really tough book. It's hard to read, but his idea is that there's been a real shift in the way we use our brains, a shift toward the left side. And that has really come along with civilization. Civilization encouraged people to use their brains in a new way, and that put us in a feedback loop. So the more we used our brains in this linear, logical way, the more we developed the left side of the brain. And that is where we stand today, where we encourage children to use the left side of the brain in a very literate, scientific way. And that keeps that feedback loop going. Then we tend to see the world in those terms. And that's the neurological explanation. But you can also look at our history, and you can start with agriculture. When we went to agriculture and we started working the land, that fundamentally altered our consciousness because no longer were we participating in habitat. Now we were taking a mastering role over habitat. And that changed everything, especially with animal powered agriculture around 5,000 years ago, when we started hooking up cows and horses and oxen to the plow. And now we're really working the land, taking mastery over the land, and all the consequences that flowed from that idea, including literacy and numeracy and hierarchy and aristocracy and everything else, flowed from that. And then you have Greeks talking about the superiority of the mental realm, the development of geometry with Euclid and Pythagoras. All of a sudden, there was this idea that there could be knowledge that was perfect and true everywhere in the universe. That was a consequence of geometry. And then Aristotle and Plato with the idea of independent forms in the mental realm and the idea that the mind is superior to the body. That was a radical idea. And all of this coming together
Mm.
with the work of Rene Descartes, that was just cataclysmic because now all of a sudden Descartes said, well, the mind is separate from and superior to the body. That was such a radical idea. And that set the stage for the scientific revolution and what I call the breaking of the world. So now we see ourselves as these mental actors, these cognitive machines, built computers to emulate that. And it's in some sense, it's a real tragedy of what we've done to our nature.
Hmm. So what do you think is, based on your like observing stuff, like how, because that's one of the fundamental questions I'm trying to now like dig into. It's like, what unites humans across time and space? Like, where is our nature actually? Like because what unites us across time and space is what is our nature, because the rest is like culture, society, things like that, right? Like the small adaptations. But so what I think, based on, all of your studies, like what is actual nature? Like how are we supposed to live from as we were talking about, from the infant stage where we are super dependent, to then being like those independent creatures? Like what is it supposed to be like?
Right. Well, I love that question because I've got a couple answers to that. First of all, Darwin. Darwin's the guy who made this possible for us to see. He he basically showed us that we are, in fact, all related, not just all people and all humans, but all life on Earth is part of this copiously branching bush. And the uniting idea here is that there's an organism in history called Luca, Luca, the last universal common ancestor. And that is simply a microbe of probably three or more billion years ago that was the ancestor of everything else. And we can apply Luca, looking at how genetics work and how genes are shared, now all this kind of thing. That is what we all have in common. We are all children of Luca. And this is Darwin's great idea, is that all life is one. And we, we get distracted from that with all our thought about, well, different races, different ethnicities, different nationalities, different peoples. And we break it into fragments, but that's a mistake. That's an error because we all are part of that same tree. So that's a good answer to your question. But the other answer comes from a guy named Steve Taylor, who's written a book called The Fall. And the way he sees it is that the Middle East and North Africa were once a very lush environment, kind of a Garden of Eden for early humans. So think back just before the dawn of agriculture, that whole region was a beautiful place with lots of plants and animals and good hunting, a great place to be a human in a tribe. There were lots of tribes living there. And something happened at that point to set humans against one another. And
Mm,
the way he sees it, that it doesn't take much for an aggressor to start a chain reaction of warlike behaviors. And that's what happened there. We were probably pretty peaceful in that era, in that environment. And then some small event set off a cascade of defensiveness and warrior kinds of cultures that really operated like a ratchet and people became more warlike. So
mm,
if you go to primatology and look at our closest relatives in the primate world, that would be chimpanzees and bonobos. And we know that chimpanzees are more warlike, they're more hostile, they're more aggressive. Bonobos are more peace loving and matriarchal. And it's entirely possible that our true nature is more like bonobos and less like chimpanzees, even though we're behaving like chimps today. So somewhere we
mm.
got got off track from our bonobo heritage. At least that's one narrative that is circulating, and one narrative that I happen to like.
That's yeah, that's super interesting. And I mean, it also, in a way, the question is super difficult because human is such a interesting machine. And you even talked about one of your videos. Even if we talk about Charles Darwin, he talks about that the most adaptable to change, right? That human is actually that a bit like we are born like nothing. We are hopeless. And in a way, there is a big part of us that gets shaped because of the environment, based on the environment we are in. And then later in life, it also happens. Like you talk about a lot about how much it affects us, like what people we surround ourselves with. And that's the big entry point to the whole topic of yours of, that you cannot like think about yourself and your health and everything just as like this me, what goes into this body, because there's so much more than us. There's the people we surround ourselves in, there's the environment we live in, there's the culture we live in, there's this planet that we live in, and then there's the universe we live in, right?
Right. And that's a theme that we hear from two very different places. We hear this word continuity in the world of native and indigenous culture, but we also hear it from modern biologists. And that they're both of these schools of thought are saying that human beings, the body is continuous with the natural world. It's continuous with the social world. And the idea that skin is somehow this barrier, that we are simply isolated organisms that don't interact with the world. That's completely false. And what we've seen in the 20th century is this rise in individualism and this philosophy of narcissism, that I am just a hairy bag of water, that I am an isolated individual. That is completely off the mark. And what we need to be doing is listening to native and indigenous people and listening to biologists who tell us about the continuity of time and space, the continuity through history, and the continuity with habitat. These are
Mm.
essential ideas that are largely ignored in modern culture. And I think it has a lot to do with consumerism and corporate advertising that's directed at individuals. It pays to teach people to behave and think of themselves as isolated individuals, but we are not. I mean, that's absolutely clear. So we've got a cultural problem in the way that we think about ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. And also because it's a lot of times portrayed as like this black and white, right? That there's either the tribe and you are nothing but the tribe, or you are just an individual, and it's all the time it's in this kind of like a battle, right? Like Nietzsche, I think, was even writing about it, that you are this lone individual, always fighting to resist the tribe. And even myself, I sometimes feel it, that in a way, if you are not in the tribe you want to be, then sometimes you feel like you are fighting the tribe in a way, that you are trying to impose your individuality, like to be someone unique in a way. So I think that maybe the paradox, or what you could say, is that I think there's somewhere where those two things meet, that you can, I don't know how, but I think you can be part of the tribe, but also be the individual in a way, and express your kind of authentic self, and kind of pursue that. What do you think about this whole?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's kind of a both and situation. Yes, we are individuals, we are members of tribe, and we need to navigate that path of both poles there. And obviously, people can swing too far in one direction or the other. If we swing too far towards towards our tribal affiliation, that can be dangerous. And that is what we've seen in the research in social psychology about groupthink and obedience to authority and cults. All of these things can come from too much affiliation with tribe. And then you could go too far the other way to hyper individualism. That's a problem too. So that's I think, just the dilemma of being a hyper social animal and trying to be in both places at once. Right. And so yeah, that's always, but the big problem right now is that our social environment is so ambiguous and so much in flux. And groups are always making up and breaking up. Social relationships are always now, especially with the smartphone. People are texting each other and breaking up, making up all the time, and we don't have a reliable social circle. Even people who have stable families still feel like they're part of something that is very unstable and that's in flux all the time. And that's historically abnormal. If you grew up in the paleo, you would be in one tribe pretty much for your whole life. You might switch tribes occasionally, but
Yeah.
that would be a big event. And you would almost never do that. So what we're doing now is historically abnormal and incredibly stressful. So
Hmm. So well, let's dive into the whole concept of, you talk about, a lot of times you refer to the word paleo.
mhm.
And I think the interesting kind of entering point here would be, um, to talk about, because I think a lot of people, when they hear, there's some people in favor of like looking at our history and how we grew up and both with our health, environment, and what we eat, what we do, and things like that. And they say, okay, let's look at that and try to replicate that because, that's what we did for so many years and for thousands of years or hundreds of thousands of years. And it must, there is like some evolutionary logic to that. And that's what helped us survive and, things of that nature. But then there's, you could say, the more like modern human, which would say like, hey, let's discard with the history and what we did. I mean, there's so much things that change, the world change. We are evolving so fast. The technology is evolving so fast. Our lives are evolving so fast, like everything's changing faster. And then there's no reason to look at that. So one, I would like to ask you, like, what do you mean when you refer to paleo? Is that, a certain era that makes the most sense to look at as far as to compare to look at like what's our model? And then like what do you think about this whole like kind of you know dichotomy, or say like looking at the history versus looking at the adaptations and the changes of the new world for
Right.
both health and body and all things related to our humans and biology.
Right. Well, these are great questions. And what I always start with is the proportion. So when you look at our Paleolithic or tree history, that accounts for like 99% of our time on Earth. And so when you look at it that way, the modern world comes across as being an exception and an kind of an outlier. So if you're talking about health, especially physical health, but also mental health, you kind of need to root it in what is normal for the human animal. And the prehistory is our normal state. So but then the question comes up, well, how can can we revert to a paleo existence? And the answer is obviously no, because there's too many people on the planet right now, and there's hardly any land that we can live in a natural way. Um, and even if you could find an area of open land and you could find people that would want to join you in living that kind of lifestyle, we don't have an oral tradition that tells us how to live. So, for example, you could get your friends and you could go to Africa and you could try and make a living in Africa, but you wouldn't have oral tradition that will tell you about how the plants and animals behave. So it's really a big ask to live in some authentic paleo way. And what people do is then they try and make compromises. They say, okay, well, I'll try and eat a paleo diet or I'll go barefoot running or whatever it is. And I don't know. That is the challenge for us right now is to retain some sense of our ancestry and some sense of our ancestral ways and make that work in the modern world. And it's a tough call. It's a really hard thing to do because we're so much of what we're doing right now is really abnormal. And there's so many pressures and incentives to live in an abnormal way. So in order to make it work, you have to step outside of culture. You have to step outside of modern culture in some way. And you won't be able to go back to the paleo, but you will be able to maybe find some ways to honor your heritage, to respect your body, to respect habitat. And there are things that we can do, but it's a pretty tough challenge.
Mm. Yeah, if you phrase it like that, that's definitely. So what got you into all of it? Like this whole, like, contemplation of this whole like past versus present and how we change and how we should be doing things. I mean, it's not such a, like I don't think one just wakes up one day from bed and thinks like, I why am I wearing these shoes? I mean, that's not.
Well, my personal story, as a young man, I started in the martial arts and I just loved it. I was going to the dojo every night and I just loved the kicking and punching and the social interaction and the discipline and the culture of the martial arts. It was great for me. And I was really interested in my body and I loved the athletic part of it. And at the same time, I was studying human biology at Stanford. And I had a professor who was very inspirational for me. And he talked a lot about evolution. And he said, look, if you really want to understand your body, you have to go to Africa. And that way you'll get a sense of your ancestry. And
Why
that,
Africa?
excuse me. Yeah, yeah. He said you got to go to Africa because that's where you got to understand your ancestry and your history. And it made perfect sense to me at the time. So I resolved to do it. And a few years later, I graduated and I did the homework and I was able to go to Africa and go out with the Bushmen and see our ancestral environment. And that just completely changed my life. It was like it engaged my imagination in a new way. And I thought of my body in a new way. And I thought of human health in a new way. And it changed everything for me. So I ended up going back to Africa a few more times and reading everything I could about ancestry, everything I could about native culture, indigenous people, Aboriginal philosophies, and that kind of thing. And it kind of all came together for me eventually. So that was my history on this.
Wow, that's and what do you think is so magical about Africa specifically? Do you think it's just that there's still like the people living in a native way? Is that the main?
Yes, and of course, not habitat, the semi-wooded mosaic grassland, that is our classic home habitat. That's where our bodies feel most comfortable. And that's where, first, that's where we evolved. That's where we spent most of our time on Earth. That's where our bodies seem to function most effectively. So that is, in a very real sense, that is our home. And there are other habitats around the world, of course, that we've colonized, but a lot of that is requires tools and technology. You know, if you want to live at the higher latitudes or higher elevations, you need certain adaptations to do that. But Africa is kind of ground zero for the human experience. So that that's what turned me on. Yeah, and then of course getting to see the Bushmen in action and to imagine what their lives were like, that was really exciting. I was able to go out on hunt with them and just see how they interacted with one another and with the environment. It was really something.
Hmm.
So
So what are like so what you know uh, of course after that you've studied it a long more time than that's just one visit. I'm curious if we just kind of conceptualize a bit more, not just look at what specifically that they do. Like, okay, they make fires and, they hunt. But as far as more like abstractly, like what are some things that we are now missing in our everyday life that used to be there, but are no longer there? And
right,
not specifically like we don't look at find the antelope, but like more, just conceptually, like what, if we abstract it out a bit.
right. Well, again, we talked earlier about human stature, we might say, and how big or small we think of ourselves. And for the Bushmen, they see themselves as part of a circle of life. They are animals with the other animals, and they study the animals. They spend a lot of each day. Of course, They don't have books and magazines and computers. They spend their free time either gossiping with one another or working on their technology and their arrowheads and their poisons and whatever and their huts. But mostly they spend their free time looking at the natural world, and that dominates their consciousness. I mean, they're looking at plants and animals all day long. And when they dream at night, the dreams aren't just random events in their brain. They're trying to enter a spiritual world where they can access what the animals are doing and
Mm.
increase their odds in the hunt the next day. So the spiritual dimension of that is enormous for them. It's every part of their life is connected to the animals in some way. So that's what's missing. Um, the way they use their bodies is completely different. I mean, they're getting lots of sensation through their skin every day, the textures and the feelings of the soil and the plants that they touch all day, every day, going mostly barefoot. Um, these kind of things or impact certainly impacting not just their skin, their brains, because the skin is a sensory organ. So they're having a completely different sensory experience than we have today. Um, so yeah, it's almost hard for us to imagine now. We've drifted so far away from that ancestral experience, and we have a lot of work to do to get back to that.
Yeah. Um, and could you maybe kind of brief me and those other people? I mean, I know a bit, but about this whole concept of, if we go back to more looking at the, me versus tribe and society, but the whole African philosophy of Ubuntu.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and like, what's the significance of it, and what it actually is? Like, if we just, not just look at the word, but like, what's the whole philosophy, and what does it mean, and what can it teach us?
Right. Well, this is an exciting idea because if you think of your life in Africa in prehistory, that was a dangerous place. That was a predator-rich environment. There were a lot of large animals that would kill you and eat you, and your only defense would be your knowledge of habitat, your understanding of the plants and animals, your understanding of natural history, but also your tribal affiliation. Because if you live in a tribe, you're less likely to be attacked by lions or leopards or hyenas. So, and then as we talked about, having an oral tradition in your tribe, the elders tell you what's good to eat and how to find food and so on and so forth. So your tribe is very much your life support system. Your tribe keeps you alive. You, in that setting, in that environment, you don't go striking off into the bush on your own. I'm sure that kind of thing probably happens, but very rarely because you don't say, I'm going to go on a walkabout by myself. You just don't do that. It's too dangerous. So the tribe is your life support system. And for that reason, it's really not surprising that African people came up with this philosophy that they call Ubuntu, which is basically their social identity. Their identity is tied to their tribe. And it's expressed in this phrase, I am who I am because of who we are. We are people through other people. And in that kind of setting, people don't brag about themselves. They don't think about themselves as individuals. No, their welfare is always connected to the tribe. And that's something, of course, lost. We don't think in those terms anymore. And it's kind of sad. Now we see it in certain settings. We see it in the world of sports where one person will identify with the tribe, and that's maybe a healthy example of this. But in general, it's broken down in the modern world. We don't think or talk about Ubuntu anymore, and it's worth remembering that.
Yeah, I think, one of our biggest, and even my problem sometimes, is that there is this And I think you also love the Sebastian Junger's work of Tribe.
Yeah. Yeah.
This whole concept of belonging, I feel like it's such a powerful, and this whole concept of also just people. I think you mentioned that we love being evaluated for like what kind of person we are, not like what, how wealthy we are, or, what cars we have, or things of that nature. Our innate kind of desire is to be evaluated for like let's say the virtues we possess. So in the context of the past, it would be, like what kind of contribution we could make to the tribe. A lot of the times the contribution was like, are you a fair person? Will you help others in need when they need to, right? And now a lot of times we're disconnected from it because we do not really belong to any kind of like tribe. We're a bit here with our family, we're here a bit at work, but it's all very much like transactional in a bit, right?
Right.
Or maybe I'm wrong. It's just my interpretation.
No, that's absolutely right. There's so much emphasis now on personal achievement and personal grandeur, personal success. Right. And that's not a paleo thing. That's not historically normal. And you can look at paleo cultures and see antidotes to that because native people understand that ego, when it gets out of control, is a problem. They know that. The elders knew that. And so they actually have cultural mechanisms to deal with this. So
Mm,
imagine that you go out on a hunt and you get lucky that day and bag a big animal and it's just great meat, a big chunk of meat, and you bring it back to the tribe. Now, you might be inclined to brag about it, but no, you don't. That's considered poor form to brag about the kill. Instead, you're expected to come back to camp with this big animal and to dishonor the meat and to play it down. You're expected to say, no, it's not really such a big animal, and I was lucky. And you downplay your athletic achievement, if you will, and you don't brag about it. And if you do brag about it, that you will be called out for that. You're not supposed to brag about your achievement. And this is called dishonoring the meat. The anthropologists call this a leveling mechanism, whereby you don't want to have hierarchy in the tribe. You want to have a pretty egalitarian tribe
mm.
because that works better in a natural environment. So this is something we've lost because now it's all about personal achievement and personal grandeur, and that's historically abnormal.
Yeah, I love, even though he was never really connected to much of like, I think, biology or, I'm looking at paleo, but the great, Peter Drucker, like the management,
Mhm.
philosophy, where he used to, say this big thing about like, don't ask, how can you be successful? Ask, how can you be useful? And I think
No,
it's a great, like, even though he doesn't come from this, topic here we are talking about, but even in the context of like business and in life, I think it's a great, at least that's something I've been trying to keep in my head that, yeah, I mean, there's a lot talking about success, but I mean, does it really matter? Isn't it more important, like how, like, in a way, useful and what contribution you made to the fellow people around you? I mean, that's,
right. And well, the Dalai Lama just put out a tweet a couple of weeks ago, and he was really blunt. He says, "We don't need more successful people. We need more artists. We need more change makers. We need more activists. Successful people are kind of the problem." And so I thought that was interesting. But to touch on your last point, in the world of organizational behavior and leadership, we see a similar theme when people talk about servant leadership. So the servant leader that's a paleo idea. That goes back a long ways, and it's kind of still alive. You hear some people talk about the importance of being a servant leader. In other words, working for the welfare of the tribe, the
Hmm.
welfare of the organization. And of course, we've drifted away from that as well because now a lot of these CEO types are celebrity, and they're anything but servant leaders. So that's a place where we can take lessons from the paleo.
Hmm. I had this one quote from you from one of your videos. Oh, that's something I wanted to kind of switch gears a bit.
Yeah.
You said that the problem with sedentary living is not so much the diabetes, obesity, and heart disease. I think it's going to lead to a serious social decay and social dysfunction.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. First thing is, I'd want to kind of get you more to open up about that, to kind of explain what you mean by that, because one of the ways my brain, in a way, interpret interprets it is that, well, I traveled quite a bit to like South America, Central America, and I've met a lot of people, and I had to, like a lot of times strike up conversations with strangers, and there was a lot of, like just trying to, like you couldn't just make it with your phone the way I was traveling. Like you couldn't just be I wasn't hopping from like hostel to hostel and just all the time being. So you were kind of forced. And then when I came back to Poland and to like let's say normal life, I had this feeling that I've been feeling like people are losing the social abilities, like in a way that people do not know anymore how to talk to other people, how to be empathetic,
Oh,
how to sit across from the other person that is stranger and find a common language,
right.
and kind of go through that uncomfortable feeling and without pulling up your phone and just kind of
Yeah.
or talking on the very like surface level, which is like a funny thing. It's a very American thing from my experience, like this super surface level conversation. It's like,
Yeah.
like, how is your day? Great. How was your day? Good. And that's all we're able to do. So I'm curious, like, how do you interpret what you said? Because my brain takes that, like in a way sedentary or like this life we're living in those offices, less social interaction. It leads to more problems than just, these physical problems, but also just kind of our social problems, and then the social turn then into health problems, because as you say, the social has a big impact on our health, right? Like the stress and not belonging and being lonely and isolated and not being able to connect. I just rambled a bit.
No, that's good. I agree totally because this is one thing I've noticed, especially in the last 10 years, is people don't seem to know how to have a conversation anymore. And that you would think is super fundamental to having a functional tribe. And if you can't have a conversation, then how are you going to agree on what's important and what kind of decisions to make? So we're in real trouble there. But getting back to this idea of sedentary living and the consequences, if you look at the way the body works and the way the muscles and the skin operate, these are the muscular system of the body isn't just about locomotion. There's also, it's a huge sensory system as well. Every time you move your body, you're flooding the central nervous system with sensation. It's telling the brain about your position in the world and the quality of the world. And if you live a sedentary life, you're taking away that sensation. So the brain does not operate in a holistic way anymore. And what it's doing is you're depriving the organism of a huge chunk of information that it could be using. And then your behavior, your decisions, all of that becomes less holistic. And you're just using a fragment of your intelligence to operate in the world. And that's like tying both your arms behind your back. That's like it's just stupid. I mean, the brain is a marvelous organ, but the brain is always a part of the body, and the brain needs the rest of the body. They talk now about embodied cognition, and that's absolutely the case. How we move our bodies is fundamental to how we understand the world. And if you live in a setting where it's all sedentary, then you're compromising your intelligence. And that's what we're doing now. And yes, it's not so much about diabetes heart, it's about how we experience the world.
Mm. Okay, so we established why it is important. So now I would say it like someone watching, right? He's thinking to himself, oh yeah, but I'm not sedentary. I mean, I work a few, like whatever, 6 or 8 hours but then I go exercise.
Right.
And then you have this whole notion of like exercise, I think, versus movement, and like this whole like sports versus just play. I would like to explore this topic of like, why what we are doing, and when we call exercise is not just enough, but in a way a lot of times might be the opposite of what we actually are after.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to give too much away because I also don't fully know, so I will just let you take that.
Well, I love this topic because when I started in the martial arts, there were a few gymnasiums around and a few exercise machines, but wasn't like it is today with exercise machines everywhere, gyms and personal trainers everywhere. It wasn't an industry back then. There were a few sports, but even not that much, and there were coaches, but not personal trainers. So I've seen a big transition, and now this assumption that you have to exercise and you have to exercise on a machine and you have to do certain sets and reps, and it all has to be scientifically validated. But again, that's historically abnormal because as animals, we never used to do any of that. And until quite recently, there was lots of physical movement, but not much in the way of exercise. So exercise is starting to look like a modern invention. And same thing for sports. Most of our sports now are modern inventions, or to put it another way, they're movement specialties. So you pick a sport and just watching the Olympics recently, a lot of these things were movement specialties and they're historically abnormal. Do we need them? Well, probably not, because our history is one of walking through habitat, occasionally running through habitat, maybe digging holes, maybe climbing trees, maybe jump, lots of movement, but no exercise. And I think there's a reason that a lot of people find exercise to be unpleasant because it's not historically normal. And and then, of course, we have people who go the other way entirely, and they exercise chronically. They exercise to excess, and it doesn't seem to me to be the answer to our problem. I think we need more movement and less exercise. You can live a very healthy life with movement, and exercise is optional. And that's what I've taken on in my life. I don't really exercise anymore, but I move a lot, and there's a difference. So I love that distinction.
Mm. So
Well,
what, because I also, like we, so far for this like 50 minutes, we talked a lot about, general like problems and how we got things wrong. So we like shook the ground a bit for, let's say, people who would be listening to this. And I also always, when I watch some podcasts or listen to things like that, I always, wish that, people would also focus a bit more of like, okay, now that we know this, like, what are we going to do about it? Like, what's the, like,
yeah,
it's all good to, talk theory and also focus on all the bad things and things we're doing wrong, things wrong with the world. But, how I always say, like, head towards the light and only the light. So like, try to find what can you do while you can, change things, or what can you do to improve. So maybe like first we can start with movement, but then we can go to other things of like how modern humans, how to say, Homo Deus. I think that's the new term, Homo Deus. How can we live more in line with our nature? And let's start with, like the first thing is exercise, or say movement. Like, how should we move, or like what should we do? Is there like some dogmatic thing we should follow, or is it just like how how are so many from your lens? Like, how have you made all like changes in your life based on kind of exploring this way we live life and how we're supposed to live?
Right. Well, it's tempting to go towards some kind of recipe or
Yeah.
formula on this stuff. And a lot of people like that and want that. And I find that difficult because I look around me and I see people living very different lives and needing very different kinds of solutions. So for me, I always emphasize creativity and opportunism. Maybe opportunism is a great word because you go through your life and it's all chaos and things are happening. And then boom, you've got an opportunity to move your body. Maybe there's just an opening in your day. Go and move your body, whether it's walking or running, something primal, something that will increase sensation into your body, whether it's gardening or even blue collar, working on your house. All of this is movement and it's valuable. Obviously, stepping away from the computer, stepping away from the phone, this is like fundamental for all of us. Uh, and lots of breaks from the computer, that kind of thing. As far as specific movements, I have a couple of medicine balls. And for me, the medicine ball is great because it's sort of an artificial rock, if you will. And I would, I, sometimes I have a rock in my house. I have a medicine ball in my office. And if I'm at my computer for a long period of time, I say enough is enough. Grab my medicine ball, and there's different shapes you can do, squats and various patterns you can do. It's all easy stuff, but that turns on your body, and now all of a sudden you feel a lot better. So be an opportunist for movement, be an opportunist for meditation and stillness, be an opportunist for conversation with people to build that continuity with one another. And just keep looking for those and find.
Hmm. And then what do you think about this whole idea that, one of the reasons why, exercise in a way is good because it's, a lot of times, you build muscle, but in a way, a lot of things we do is in this like one plane of motion. And also, second thing is that we supposedly, there's this one guy, very interesting perspective as far as like how our human flexibility and the predictor of like your healthy body, about the fact that we do everything almost above the hip.
Mhm.
Like we no longer like squat, we no longer sit. It is like, sitting, like we sit, but in a different way. We are always above. So I'm curious if there is anything related to those two things about this kind of that frontal plane, you can say, and then spending a lot of time like above your hips, always there. If there's anything in like everyday life that we are missing because of that, and what consequences does it have?
That's all true. The way we are using our bodies now is fundamentally abnormal. The chair has been catastrophic for human posture and human locomotion. We're so quick to be seated and use chairs all the time now that there there's a lifestyle tweak here that you can do is have fewer chairs in your home and fewer chairs. Use a physio ball or squat more. Check out the number of times each day that you feel like you have to sit down. Well, maybe you don't have to sit down. That's a good tweak. Your idea about isolating the upper body, that's totally true. We do that all the time. We operate in a single plane. We operate in the sagittal plane too often, where we need to move in the frontal plane and also in the transverse plane. And the thing to keep in mind here is that historically speaking, after hunting and gathering, the the oldest form of human movement is dance. And dance,
Mm.
you see it all over the world. And dance is what we do when the hunt is successful and we have food in our bellies and we're feeling good. Dance is the go-to movement. And that's another paleo idea. That you don't have to be a good dancer and you can fake it. But dance is beautiful because it's a multi-plane movement. It involves the whole body. And however you like to dance, it's good.
Mm. And what did I ask you about as far as like exile? What do you think about this whole idea of play? I mean that that we are essentially evolved. That one of the first things we do is play,
Mhm.
but then we've kind of forgotten how to play. And play is how we rejuvenate, how we how we. And a lot of people would say, "Yeah, I play. I don't know. I play football. I play this," but I don't know if that's the same play. I think play is more of state of mind.
Yep. Yep.
I
It's
don't
about,
know.
and it's really hard to talk about because humans are so playful in so many ways. And it may not be apparent to somebody else whether you're playing or not. You might have a playful idea that you're working in your mind that nobody would even recognize that as being playful. But it's this is another problem in the modern world because what we've done, especially with youth sports and young people's education, is we professionalize these things now. So kids are encouraged to have professional um, programs in athletics, which takes away their play. And then this whole highly competitive culture that we've created now, it's all about performance, and that tends to take us out of play. So
Mm.
it, it's something that is incredibly valuable for all of us in all domains. And we have gotten away from it now because it's all about achievement and not about the process of enjoying ourselves. And it's kind of a tragedy. And we need to get back to that and to have more time.
Mm. So let me ask you quite a deep question. I know you'll not have like a final answer there, but this also one of the questions I'm exploring for myself. Like one of those bigger ones is, like what ultimately is the difference between work and play, and where
Yeah.
and and are we supposed to, like, through your lens will be through paleo lens? Like, are we supposed to do this thing called work, or everything should be kind of play? There's this one of my favorite quotes. I will not find it now, but that like that we should be doing kind of both and leave others to decide whether we are working or playing. But for us, it should always kind of feel like play. So, and also touching on you're talking about like playful and serious. I'm also thinking about that, like that a lot of people are, I feel like more and more serious in this life. And I was supposed to be so serious, right? Is the universe playful or serious? Is everything meant to be, treated so seriously or maybe not? Or like, is there something win, like that's very the test.
That's a great question because if you, again, you look at it from a historical perspective, work is absolutely abnormal. There was no work prior to about 10,000 years ago. And work is something that happened with agriculture. And it really intensified with the Industrial Revolution. And then we came up with this value system. We said, okay, work is good, work is important, work is valuable. And that's an alien idea. That never happened before. And this is what the anthropologists talk about when they talk about the Bushmen of the Kalahari. They call that the original affluent society because those people would go out hunting. It only took a few hours each day to secure some food, and they would spend the rest of the day gossiping, playing, messing around, and doing whatever they felt like. So there was no ethic about work. And now it's completely inverted. And now a lot of people tragically feel like work is the only value and work is their identity as well. And that I think is a real tragedy. So somehow we've got to remember the past and we've got to remember our true nature and remember that work is um, sometimes it's important, sometimes it's something that we need to do, but it's not who we are. No, I think play is closer to our original nature.
Hmm. That's an interesting. And how do you think the call like playful versus serious thing interplays with that?
Well, I'm sure that when paleo people went out hunting, they were quite serious about it. And when the great cave painters would do their images on the cave walls, they were serious about that as well. But when you listen to your body, it tells you when you've got too far. And for example, in the sporting world, you can tell, you can feel when play turns into work. It feels different. And sometimes it's necessary to put in the sets and the reps. Sometimes it's necessary to train really hard and to be workish in your approach. But you need to feel the difference. And that's something that I learned as an athlete because you can definitely tell when you're throwing the medicine ball around and you're having fun with your friends, it feels playful. But if you get too serious, that feels like work. And now that you got to be careful with that.
Hmm. That's interesting. Okay. So I think, yeah, we've been going through many things. And I think one of still the topics that we haven't addressed, if of course you've got some more time and you're willing to talk,
Yeah, yeah,
it's stress.
right.
So, so there's a few ways we could, approach this topic, but, the one curious maybe starting point for me is I heard from this one scientist who has this really great channel now, Andrew Huberman, that talks about like neuroscience and like new findings, and they're really like from Stanford, I think. And I think, as far as I remember, I hope I'm not like misinterpreting what he said. He was saying that stress is kind of like there's not specifically that it's good or bad. It's mostly how we interpret it.
Yeah.
Of course, like you would say chronic is bad and the short term is preferable because then you kind of, we are adaptation machine and we need some stress to kind of evolve. But I think let's start with this idea. Like, what do you think about stress as far as looking at it that maybe we got stress all wrong. And the reason we are so stressed that we are interpreting a certain response in our body as it is stress. And then we become even more stressed. But maybe if we took it differently, then wouldn't be stress. We would be like, okay, the body is telling me something. And I don't know where I want to go with it, but it's just an entry point.
Oh, yeah, we could spend days and days talking about this, and it's really an interesting topic. Um, the problem, as I see it, is that in most of the popular press, the popular magazines, and that, there's a standard narrative about what stress is, and that narrative holds that stress is an individual problem, individual solutions. So if you're
Mm,
feeling stressed, here's the recipe, and if you follow this recipe, you can make stress go away. So there's a couple of problems with that. Is that number one, stress is actually a social problem. It's a cultural problem. It's something that flows through population because we are a hyper social animal. And if there is emotion that is surging through the population, you're going to feel it because you're connected to everybody else. So stress is contagious and it's a shared predicament. Uh, and we feel it even if we're not consciously aware of it. So that's I think how we need to talk about stress. Um, and then you're absolutely right. It's a question of interpretation. You have these sensations in your body. How do you interpret those? Well, there's a great study out there. I think the woman's name was June Gruber. She primed people to think about stress either as a challenge or as a threat. And that's a crucial distinction because if you see your circumstances as a challenge, your body will turn on certain physical responses that are beneficial. So you'll get more blood to your brain, your arteries and veins will open up, you'll have better circulation, your brain works. But if you see those circumstances as a threat, it all goes the other way. And now the body uh, closes off, if you will. The body does not function as well.
Mm.
Just that interpretation and just that question, is this thing a challenge or is this thing a threat? That that's a great practical question that we can always ask ourselves as we prepare for an event or and look at our circumstances. Is this a challenge? Well, that's something I can deal with. Is it a threat? Well, that requires something different. So
Mm.
those are some of the basic ideas that I think.
Okay. I mean, there's many ways I could go with this, but I'm maybe curious, like what interests you most now about stress? As far like what angle are you mostly thinking about as far as like, for example, there is one idea that I heard in quite a few people, and I agree mostly that, there also one big problem as far as the general topic of stress is that, our lives are too comfortable for the most part. And we just need more voluntary stress in a way that if you voluntarily approach stress, like if you do sauna, you do cold bath, you do, things that kind of stress you, but temporarily, and also, you voluntarily do them, then later when something stressful actually comes, you're more easily able to handle them. But that's just like kind of one way of looking at stress. But I'm maybe more curious of like what's generally most interests you as far as this whole topic, because it's a giant topic.
Right, right. And I look at it historically, and where we've got these bodies that are primed by evolution to succeed in a wild Paleolithic kind of environment. And now, boom, we're in this modern environment, and this puts us in a situation what a lot of people call mismatch. So ancient bodies, modern world, that's the mismatch. And that itself is a stressor. And it's a stressor that affects every human on the planet right now. And the the life lesson there, the message there is that we're all suffering from this, and it leads us to look at one another a little bit differently. So I look at the people around me, it's easy to be judgmental and be upset and be unhappy with how they're behaving. But then if you look at it through the lens of mismatch, you say, well, these are just animals that are trying to function in an alien environment. Now, all of a sudden, we can be more compassionate for those people. We can be more compassionate for ourselves because we're all fighting this battle. We're all trying to adapt to a world that we don't really know. We don't really understand. So that that ground lesson there, I think, is really important to remember. That's when we think biologically, that's the consequence.
Mm. That's a really, yeah, I always try to think like what's the message that's good. How could we twist the narrative in the world to feel more connected? I feel like one of the best places I've still, and I want to come back and move there is is South America. And I think it's not because it's rich, because it's not. it's
Well,
uh it's not because there's the best natural like environment, and there is a lot of beautiful places.
mhm.
And and I think it's not because of food. I think the food is also good, but it's because people have this like positive way of about them. Like there is, even though they might have little and and they're maybe not so good off, and they somehow, and it's such a mixed cultures there. But one thing that unites them is that there's way more positivity and kind of like this helpful spirit and this kind of open openness to other people, even strangers. And I love this so much. And, I haven't studied enough to say like, why is it? But it's a curious thing, I guess, in Europe is more closer to, to North America, to States.
Right.
But, there, even though a lot of those countries are no longer like with native people, so like Europeans who came in there, they have this like really interesting mix of like a bit of like European culture and
Hmm.
then this South American positive sunshine way. Like just and I don't know where I'm going with this, but that's just what I was just
But no,
stomach.
that's good because I think Native people in general are more in touch with the humanities. They're more in touch with story and dance and art.
Yeah,
And
they already played way more instruments and dance. Yeah, definitely.
right. And once again, this is one of the problems that I see in modern culture is that we're going all in on this STEM curriculum for young people, science, technology, engineering, math, and we're losing contact with the humanities, especially at the university level, where we're saying, well, the humanities won't get you a high paying job. STEM curriculum will get you a high paying job. So let's just stop teaching the humanities. And that's just a mad catastrophe because the humanities, that's cool. That's our greatest invention, what we've ever done. And we could live without STEM. Well, we can't live without the humanities. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
Why is that? Because for example, through hearing some people, one of the really interesting arguments is that we've turned, there's this guy, I love his concept about beauty, that we turn our face away from beauty. And beauty is something that, be it through art, music, dance, I know, like it could be a beautiful woman, it could be a sunset, it could be a natural, but it really gives us hope, gives us like this kind of transcendent feeling that no other thing is almost able to give us. And one thing, there has to be beauty. So one thing I love our creation, architecture, things that are no longer beautiful, but then you also need to be able to appreciate it, right? To like be kind of in tune with like that kind of like frequency of like being able to appreciate a beautiful sunset, right? With like those simple things.
Yes. And in fact, there's some great research that's coming out recently about the experience of awe.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, now you can actually do this in a laboratory. You can prime people to have awe, especially with videos about nature and awe-inspiring things, and then have control groups and measure people's responses. And people who are primed to have an awe experience actually have changes in their bodies, pro health and pro social changes in their bodies. And that's a really interesting idea because in prehistory, people would have been in a state of awe almost every day. I mean, you think of the night sky, you think of seeing the animals, of nature scenes all the time. Your body would have been almost always in a state of awe versus now we don't have that experience very much. So that's another thing about the modern world.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
wonder, right? Like
Yeah.
wonder about like you're looking at the stars and contemplating, like just
Yeah.
wondering and awe at also the vastness of and our like smallness and all of it. And
Right. Right.
I don't fully know like why. I think part of it that there is this thing which you I think mentioned about, when you're just out there in nature, like if you just kind of calm down and you are out there enough in like true nature, not like park in a city. That's
Right.
not nature in my opinion. It's like artificial nature to help us not feel so awful about our existence in a city. But if you're really out there in the nature, you can't help but get this feeling of like interconnectedness, like
Yeah.
that there is this harmony and then there's this bird and then there's this and there's you and that I think the awe in a way or it is like kind of natural. but then you have to be in tune with it, and you have to be in the thing in real nature. Because nature, no matter how I feel like no matter how our great inventions now, great technology, things we've created, and we go to the moon, you still like you are at this like beautiful place landscape, and you're like, that's just incredible. Like how like we are not able to do that. Like nature is much bigger than us.
Right. And that's the key, is the willingness to be small, the
Yeah.
willing to have humility and modesty. And if we could do that, then we could feel the awe in a bigger way. And that would be beneficial. So it's all about getting over our own personal grandeur and our own species level um, narcissism and feeling ourselves small once again. And then we've got a chance.
Yeah. I mean, humility. We came back. I think in my initial message, I talked about it because it's like, I think, humility is like this root thing cause of, you're talking about of narcissism, grandiosity. Carl Jung was talking about it, right? I read this book, King Warrior, Magician Lover, about the immature male psyche and how, being this kind of, a lot of those people who achieve success get this kind of like bigger than cow mentality,
Mhm.
you know, and I think the way we can tie it back and kind of finish the conversation, because probably you're getting tired, is I'm thinking about this constantly about this also in talking about humility. I think we became more and more like specialized work, right? Like we become like everyone's like working on smaller and smaller specializations.
Right,
And
right.
then each of those people in the specializations at some point thinks like through that lens is the only way to explain the word, and what they do is the most important. And then, you kind of counter that with this whole idea of holistic approach, or like generalism of like understanding many different fields and being able to connect them. And I think there's some deep problem now of like, we become like really good and we can figure out this, like research and discovery in this field. But a lot of times you become so dogmatic that, you can explain everything in the world through the biology lens, or through that, or maybe through this specific, diet is the answer to everything. But then a lot of people others hear, for example, the word holistic approach, and they're like, holistic, and it means nothing. Like it's just even trying to sell me some, think good, and everything will come to me.
Right. Yeah. And you describe it perfectly. I mean, the challenge of specialization is really, it's really corrosive to our understanding of the world. And it's also corrosive to our ability to talk to one another. Because if you have a specialization that you dig really deep, and I have a different one, then how are we supposed to talk to one another? It's really hard. So to kind of wrap it up, I always remember this Model T of human knowledge, and that's you want to be broad, but you also want to find one thing that you really really know and love. And somebody quipped on this. They said, "Try to know something about everything and everything about something." And I love that idea because that keeps you balanced, right? That keeps you got 1 foot in the horizontal, 1 foot in the vertical, and now to be a fully functioning human being.
Wow, that's a word of wisdom. I remember that.
Yeah.
That's great. I don't know, and I think else we missed, and you wanted to maybe touch on, say, I don't know, tell last words of advice, some idea you wanted to explore, or leaves with
Boy,
unanswered question that you have in your mind.
oh, there's so many, and for me, this moment in history is really tough because we're faced with this planetary crisis and people are really stressed. People don't know quite what to do. There's a lot of activist energy out there now and a lot of struggle going forward. And we don't have a unified narrative for the people on this planet. The old narrative of man over nature is not working for us. A lot of people stick to it, but a lot of people don't believe it anymore. And so we need a new story. We need a new narrative. And that's going to be our goal. That's going to be our work for the next 1,000 years. And so we have to be really patient, but we need artists, we need storytellers, we need people to start working on that narrative. And if we can tell that story, the unifying story, then we've got a chance. And that's my job going forward.
So how would you start that story in a way? Like, what's the hopeful message?
Well, it gets back to these two words, continuity and interdependence. And this is the native people, indigenous people have had this story for a long time. The story actually exists, but we have to find a way to tell that story in the modern world and keep reminding ourselves we are continuous with the world. We are interdependent with the world. And if we can remind ourselves of that, then that's a way forward.
Mm, I love that. And read more or listen to more Alan Watts. No, I'm joking. No, thank you so much, Frank. It was amazing conversation. I think we touched on, I think a lot of topics that, I think are important and I want to explore more. And I think you shared some really interesting angles and insights that I haven't thought about. And I think I'm pretty sure that people listening to this will have similar
Yeah, wonderful,
reflections.
wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed this, and maybe we can do it again sometime. And hope to meet you in person someday. That would be fun too.
Thank you so much for watching. And if you like what you see and you want to support this show, then make sure to subscribe and you will get notified about upcoming videos. Also, if you're interested to learn more about the quest for questions or want to work with me on marketing strategy or your personal brand, then head over to konradyerba.com. And also there you will find that you can download my book on email marketing and B2B marketing strategy called The Art of War on the Inbox. And in the meantime, let Yerba be with you.